welcome to the 65th episode of The Week with Roger, the conversation between analysts about all things telecom, media, and technology from Recon Analytics. I'm Don Kellogg, and with me as always is Roger Entner. How you doing, Roger?
I'm great.
Good. So last week was a busy week of investor conferences. We heard from the CEOs and CFOs of all of the national network operators. And, typically we'll do analysis and commentary whenever these folks speak. One of the things that really struck me as we were going through that process was the extent to which all the national operators are doubling down on broadband. And they all seem to view it as a huge opportunity. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about that and kind of what our perspective is on that.
Yeah, well, cable, the cable MSOs were the big winners in fixed broadband for now the last decade, if not longer, right? They were really running the table. They enjoyed a very, very good run. And I guess now the wireless guys and the more integrated carriers are like, we're kind of a little bit sick of this, and I think we can take it back. And the evidence is very good for it, right? Wherever Fios is like the poster child of being the fiber overbuilder, especially here in the Northeast, and wherever Verizon has Fios, they end up with like 55-60% market share, but they haven't built out anywhere else. And for more than 10-15 years, Fios has not had a significant expansion. And now Verizon with Fios is building out, AT&T is building out, and I don't think with fiber, right? And they're looking at the numbers that Fios has achieved as realistic goals, right? Because they need about 35-40% to break even on a fiber build out. But they think they have a really good shot. And then on top of it, especially Verizon and T-Mobile view their networks as multi-use networks where they can use unused capacity to provide fixed wireless at very competitive speeds to households that sometimes have cable with 100 megabits and faster, and a lot of it to rural and semi-rural ISPs who only have DSL these days. And so that's a really good prospect. Now they're going to run into the whole broadband build-out plan spend of like $60 billion. And so it's going to be a race of who will get to these customers first.
The key distinction here, specifically for Verizon and T-Mobile, is also 5G, right? So 4G wasn't necessarily competitive versus 100 megabit cable connections, but 5G could be, right? And there's particularly if you're using mid-band like T-Mobile is today and like Verizon plans to do once they get their C-band spectrum.
And millimeter wave, right?
Right.
All of them have...
Although arguably millimeter wave is not going to cover your rural areas because it doesn't propagate far.
Correct. But millimeter wave in dense urban areas has a very viable speed comparison with 300 megabits to a gigabit. And especially for people who have been disappointed by cable, and we can read in the press about that, they're just waiting for a viable alternative to show up. And so will you get 60% market share with millimeter wave fixed wireless in dense urban? Maybe not, but you can get 20, you can get 15.
Well, the economics of using fixed wireless for carriers where you have extra capacity is really good. I mean, I think, Peter Zvaldik at T-Mobile talked a lot about this, where, the CapEx spend that you're making or you're spending for the network for the wireless side of things also works for, the fixed wireless side, right?
Yeah,
so if you've got capacity, it's free money. Exactly.
It's free money because you build the network with a mobility use case. The network is up. The marginal cost of supplying an additional gigabit or gigabyte is very low, right? And so why not? There are customers to be had, right? At the same time, I don't think it's that easy. You know, both the MSOs and the MNOs, they are really good companies, and you underestimate them at your own peril. Either way, right? And so, for example, I thought it was very interesting. Peter Oswaldik talked about, oh, on one hand, cable did a lot better than they thought. And it reminds me of what Mike Sievert said like several years ago, where he said like the biggest problem with cable is that it moves at the speed of cable. And I think they've taken this back because they have been impressed with the success of the cable providers in wireless. But at the same time, he's right, they're 10%. But that's a little bit misleading because in the Charter and in the Comcast footprint, they're making 25% gross ads, SOGA, right? And that's quite respectable. SOGA wise, they're right there with everybody else. So it's a very viable competition.
But I mean, the sales model for the MSOs though is really, they line you up with your broadband service, and then they say, hey, do you want some inexpensive wireless service on a well-known and respected national network, which is Verizon's, as we all know. Isn't there an opportunity for the carriers to kind of do something similar, which is to say, hey, here's your wireless service, and by the way, do you want to get your broadband from our brand as well, right? And it's just a little bit extra.
Yeah, and we heard from all of them that they have actually done a really good job in going both ways. 50% of new customers for their fixed wireless or for their fiber offer comes from new customers that don't have a wireless option.
Right. So Verizon and AT&T both have said with their broadband product that 50% of the customers they're getting with those products are new to their brands, right? So 50% of folks coming to AT&T fiber are new to AT&T. 50% of folks coming to Verizon's fixed wireless are new to Verizon, right?
Yeah, so this is a bi-directional upgrade opportunity, right? The wireless customers can be upgraded to fiber, and the fiber customers can be upgraded to or upsold to wireless. And that's quite significant because what we've seen from the cable guys is that the funnel only works one way. They bring in the fiber guys, predominantly the fiber guys, and then upsell them to wireless. We have seen less the other way around, that people come to the cable guys for wireless and then they also get cable. And so that is a slightly weaker precision. Now they're selling it at a lower price point, and now they're also selling it with family with very competitive family plans. So I would expect a little bit more. But when I look at how successful is cable in wireless, then I look at the cable gross ad rate, right? That's the most meaningful predictor of their wireless performance.
Right. So where does this go next? I mean, what are we watching for? I know T-Mobile had mentioned that they hit their 500,000 fixed wireless net ads target a month early. I assume that Verizon had started reporting fixed wireless net ads last quarter as well as T-Mobile. What should we be looking for, and what are some of the tea leaves we're looking at in terms of how we tell if this is actually working for the wireless carriers or for the MSOs?
Yeah, well, I think for the next year, I think the fixed wireless offers are going to be very competitive. A big gating factor for Verizon is that whole brouhaha with the FAA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the longer that takes, the slower FWA will ramp. We'll see how quickly the 3.45 spectrum will come on board, which should have none of the restrictions or the conflict right now. And then we have to look at when is the fiber, the broadband money coming from the federal government and funneling through the state, because that will now suddenly make the rural telcos that are currently offering DSL very competitive with fiber, courtesy of federal funding, right? And that and when fixed wireless runs into fiber, my money is on fiber, right?
Right. Well, I thought it was interesting when John Stankey of AT&T spoke last week. He talked a lot about how AT&T is good at working with government, and seem to be alluding the fact there, and there don't seem to be any restrictions at the federal level, at least, in terms of who can win this money from the states, right? So there's a situation where like a fiber builder like AT&T or like Verizon, for that matter, could also capture a fair amount of that build out money.
Absolutely. Now it would be a reversal of strategy, because when you look at it over the last 15 years, the companies like Verizon, like AT&T, have gotten rid of their very rural lines and focused mostly on urban and suburban markets. And I think that's a big misunderstanding with a lot of people that think like AT&T and Verizon are still serving, very lightly populated areas. They successfully sold that to others to hold that back, and now that's coming a little bit out.
But they're still operating multi-use networks that have fiber lines running all over the country, right? So it's not like AT&T's fiber network ends where the borders of the suburbs end, right? I mean, they have the capability, and the core network that exists in the ground today, or on the poles today, is fiber, right? So there's nothing to stop them from doing that, particularly if there's incentives involved from the states and federal government.
Yeah, and generally their own fiber. And you saw it with Verizon's One Fiber policy. They, in the top 60 markets, in footprint or out of footprint, they are running their own fiber to the base stations and the antennas. And they can use this to go predominantly first after business, right? And AT&T is doing the same thing in their 21 state footprint. Why pay somebody else when you can have owner economics? So we see that the only one who is buying fiber exclusively from a third party is T-Mobile. I'm waiting for T-Mobile to potentially resurrect some plans of using some of the 2.5 gig spectrum for microwave backhaul, especially in rural America, where you don't need 200 megahertz of spectrum for a couple hundred people. So there they can significantly cut costs. I see that. And the other thing I'm looking forward to is to see, how Manon Brouilette will change Verizon's consumer group. Because, we always say numbers and facts are very important, but people make decisions, right? And even though she said at the investor conference nothing will change, I'm sorry, new people join to make changes. If you want to have no change, you keep the old team. And they clearly didn't keep the old team, right? So her job is to do things differently than Ronan did it.
Well, and her background is interesting too, given that she was running a company that was kind of converged, Videotron in Canada. They did have MVNO agreements, but they were kind of forced upon them by the regulators. So I think there's some interesting perspective she's going to have, given that there's a lot less regulation here in the U.S. and
Well, when you look at the voyage that Videotron, she was the CEO of Videotron until 2018. And so she was the cable provider, fixed internet. Then they became an MVNO. Then they bought spectrum in most of Canada. And when the wind transaction fell through, they sold it again outside Canada. And then she built her own wireless network within Quebec. And so in a way, she went down the road of what the cable companies are doing themselves right now, right? And they're building their own network. So she walked in their shoes, which can be really good for cable or really, really bad, because she knows exactly from their side of the table of how that whole relationship and their constraints are looking like. But at the same time, one of our industry friends said, like, oh, she ran this Videotron in Quebec. That's the size of Ohio, right? So, and Kenan from Barclays, where she spoke, was like, he basically said the same thing. It's like, oh, but Videotron was really small, and she's like, yeah, but it's the same mechanics. So we'll see how that works of scaling the lessons from a smaller integrated telecommunications provider to one of the 10 largest in the world, right? So there's a different set of challenges. Now the mechanics are the same, right? Mechanically, a 100-meter dash is the same as a marathon run. It's one step after the other, but how it all plays out is a little bit different. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Well, nobody is born into running these companies, right? So I think anybody who comes into that role is going to have a period of time when they're learning and kind of wrapping their head around the scale that a company like Verizon has, right?
And she got that luxury over the last 6 months of being the COO next to Ronan, and Ronan is an excellent executive. He did a lot of things really, really well, knows this market extremely well after being a very seasoned executive at O2. And I'm sure he will be missed, not by the competition, but he's a good guy.
All right, Roger, that's all we have time for this week. We'll talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.